Hi, folks, with Tacitus today, your pushback channel, and thank you for joining this audio live stream. In this essay, I'd like to talk about what appears to be quite a marked and substantial uptick in sexual assaults of white Western women and girls, some age, 10, 11 years old, and those assaults and inappropriate behaviours are being perpetrated by you know people part of the mass migration wave, particularly people from third world Islamic societies. So now, I don't think there's any doubt that or anyone would dispute it's happening. There's an ideological sort of struggle. No, it's all those white Nazis. Then there's Hitler. No, but the reality is it's not. It's these third world low IQ peasants that are being brought into the West en masse and being forced in or forced into the West against the wishes of the local people, indeed in outright defiance of the wishes of the local people, and bringing them in en masse. And now, one of the things that sort of crossed my mind was, well, if you're bringing these people in from vastly different societies and different religious structures, very tribal, very rural, they can't even conceive of a first world Western lifestyle. The laws around the West, the independent courts, once no longer though. The police in the UK, for example, as other courts, are just globalist enforcers now, and nothing more. But the idea of independent police and courts and independent codified law, these sorts of things, this is something these societies have no concept of. They can't even conceive of it, and they're very tribal, very pious in the case of not only the Islamic religions, but also, say, some of the Pacific Islanders around, to the northeast of Australia and so on. They also have very different views on piety, and it's very much built around a tribal sort of concept. Now, why is it when these people are brought into the West by the globalist system and machine, why aren't they given detailed, comprehensive instruction on Western values, behaviours, what to expect, how to behave, and so on? And much to my surprise recently, I noticed there are a number of NGOs that are being paid colossal sums of money, colossal sums, not only in refugee camps around Africa or whatever, but they're paid huge sums of money to go into the areas where these, whether they be illegal or legal mass migrants, to go where they are and to give instruction. There's also online instruction available as well. And these NGOs are paid vast sums of money to do this. Now, I don't know, maybe they're doing it by correspondence and it's all getting lost in the post or something like that, but it appears to be having very little effect. Now, if it's folks from college educated, urban living people that maybe part of their education has been in the West anyway, the so-called upper classes, higher IQ people where they're not procreating with their cousins and so on. Maybe they sort of really don't need that much instruction anyway, but it's available to them and they may refer to it. But the village peasants who are illiterate in their own language and have got an IQ of 70 or 80, it's very different, and their understanding of what's being explained to them is quite minimal, and obviously they're not grasping it. Now, I've as I've mentioned a million times, I've done a vast amount of international travel on business, and I've gone to some of these Islamic republics where they're extremely devout, or purport to be at least, and you have to be aware of the great differences in their attitudes and behaviors. Not so much from the elites; they're sort of somewhat westernized. They play up to the Islamic stuff locally, but the reality is that as soon as the cameras and the peasant viewings off them, they're into the alcohol and behaving like any corrupt Western CEO would. But the reality of these places is, particularly in the areas that are more devout, is I mean, if looks could kill, I'd have been dead 100 times, 1,000 times over in some of these places. I went into, for example, to go into museum, and the information desk there is manned by women in burqas with only the eyes showing, and the seething hatred coming out of the eyes towards me was just because I'm a Christian. I'm a non-believer. I'm outside of the thing. So there's a few, there's a few things that I guess have to be understood or need to be understood about these people if we're to understand their behaviour and their attitude to women and girls and these sexual assaults and so on. Now, firstly, is the law is, if you look at any Islamic republic, the minister for law and religion is typically, it's the same job. They don't see the separation between Islamic religion and the necessary behaviour and the law. So they don't have codified law in the same way that we do. The reference is to the holy texts of the texts of the Prophet Muhammad. So the law is that. Now that's not a huge surprise, because we look at the laws that we have in the West. Their roots or base is very much comes from Christianity and the teachings of Christ and God, and thou shalt not steal and so on. And there's a lot of commonality, by the way, with other religions. The Christian religion is that you don't steal from anybody, you don't kill anybody. Not that was perfectly observed, by the way, it wasn't. And the Pope, in the days of Catholicism, the Pope would give dispensations to people that killed non-Christians. Now, but those were one-offs and were specific for purposes like the Crusades, for example. It's a little bit different in the Islamic and even the Hindu religions to some extent, that if you kill someone from outside of your religion or outside of your tribe or outside of your devoted and pious group, then it's okay if you cheat them and all that sort of. That's all right. You're allowed to do that, and the penalties you receive either don't exist or they're not quite as onerous. So if you kill a Christian, for example, and they say, well, hey, don't do that again. That's just bad politics. But if you kill another, murder another, someone of the Islamic faith, then the penalties can be severe, or you steal from someone of the faith. So they've got very different views on this. So a Christian woman, for example, has no protections under the law of Allah. And the dividing line between the codified law and the laws of Allah is very blurred and indistinct, unlike in the West, where it's the separate courts and so on. So that if the courts that decide guilt or innocence or punishment in the Islamic religions are the courts of faith, the courts and the person that meting it out will be the local imam from the local village or the local tribal area or so on. So it's very much tied to the tribe and the faith, unlike in the West, where there's these independent courts. You don't know the judge or the police, that you don't know them. They have no standing in they're not religious or devout. They're not part of your tribe. They're not part of your religion. What authority do they have? They have none. I'm just being, punished by white man's law here, and why should I take it? I haven't done anything wrong. So they're very unrepentant in their views. Now, in a lot of these, these Pakistan and places like that, these tribal societies, as soon as a girl begins menstruating, then she's available at that point for intimate relations and indeed procreation. So the idea of them, someone from an Islamic republic coming to the West, and a 12-year-old girl is well, there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, I do that in Pakistan, or I do that in the Islamic Republic. Why are these white men telling me, only the imam, only the religious leader can tell me not to do that? And that religious leader is saying that Christians and white girls are not protected by Allah. So I'm not doing anything wrong. Well, why? And by the way, if the girl was being properly looked after, she'd be chaperoned everywhere she went, and she'd be wearing a burqa. She'd be covered from top of her head to the tip of her toes, and she's not. These white girls walk around in shorts and t-shirts or bathing costumes, that sort of thing. So clearly they're not being protected by Allah, and so I'm not doing anything wrong. Is their reasoning, and the simpler they are, if you've got an IQ of 70 or 80, you can only absorb very, very simple messaging. And as far as they're concerned, well, that girl's showing lots of flesh, and she's not being chaperoned. Thus, I can do it, and I will not get in trouble with Allah. And that's, I'm simplifying it, but that's the reason that goes with it. So they don't believe they're committing crimes. They don't believe, well, I haven't really done anything wrong. And if you didn't want me to do it, then you'd make sure those women were covered from head to toe, even on a hot day. They can't wear shorts and t-shirts or something on a hot day. They can't wear bathing costumes on the beach because they're advertising themselves for sexual relations, and they're not protected by Allah because they have no honor or piety, and they have no chaperone. And so they would see it all in that sense, that they haven't done anything wrong. Now, why you would bring in millions of people like that into the West to think that way and believe that way, and are immune to education and guidance, assuming they even get it. Again, NGOs have paid a lot of money to give this education and guidance. And also some of these people that have been in refugee camps for years, and they could have received that instruction there, but somehow they're, again, immune to it. Now, when they come to the West, they're able to go to mosques and Islamic centers and these sort of things where the anti-Western message is reinforced. You don't. These people do not have the protection of Allah. You are not necessarily committing a crime. Sure, there are white man's crimes. Sure, there's Christian, criminology and penalties. But that doesn't really count. You're not really doing anything wrong. Okay, those Christians, they'll create a fuss and kick up a fuss about it, but Allah isn't concerned. Allah will not punish you. You'll still go to paradise, no matter how many of these women you've raped or defiled or something, and Allah will not punish you. And so they get this message reinforced. Now, this could be easily broken up and stopped by Western authorities, but they choose not to. They choose to allow this stuff to go on, whereas they could very easily clamp down on it. If a bunch of white people get together and complain about mass migration, then the authorities come down on them like a ton of bricks. Nazis, neo-Nazis, swastika-waving Nazis. We had to go and stop. The strong government is stopping it. But when this other stuff goes on, and Allah forgives you for sexually assaulting white women, the authorities sort of nowhere to be seen. I mean, that seems very strange. It almost seems purposeful, if not willful. Now, coming back to sort of my time going to Islamic countries, I'm very careful. I don't want to offend anybody. If I'm there on business, I'm being paid to do business. I'm not a tourist, although if I get some time off, I may go to the museum or a cultural centre or something like that. In some of these places, nothing's in English, so I'm struggling to work out what some of these things are all about. But nonetheless, I go to those. But still, I'm very careful to not be disrespectful or not to do anything that could incur the wrath of the religious authorities. And I'm quite mindful of the fact that they are devout and pious in their observance of the word of Allah, and I don't want to trespass across that or into that. So I keep to myself, mind my own business, stick to the knitting, which is doing business, of course. And now most of the people at the business level, at least that I'm interacting with, are reasonably, in the overall scheme of things at least, reasonably sophisticated, and they're reasonably well travelled. Again, many of them being Western educated, or they've had Western teachers to give them tutelage on this or that, mathematics or something, through the school system and the college system. So that's not an issue. Again, I'm cautious and respectful, and if someone's been to Mecca, and I ask their permission. May I call you Haji? The Hajj, as a sign of great respect and so on, and then they give their permission. So I'm very mindful of all that, and wouldn't dream of trespassing on any of their sacred cows. That's not the same with people coming from Islam to the West. That idea of being respectful and so on is not something that crosses their mind. And why should they? Women should be covered from the top of the head to the tip of the toe. They're not. Therefore, they do not deserve my respect. Women should be chaperoned at all times by male relatives. They're not. Schoolgirls going from school, walking home, they're not being chaperoned. Therefore, Allah says I can do what I want, and so on. So the whole thing feeds into a wider narrative of acceptable behaviour or not. Now, the Western authorities could, before you're going to come into the West and live here, be it as an illegal or a migrant or whatever, you're going to have to pass a test on this. And if you're an illiterate peasant, illiterate in your own language, we can't have you in here because we can't educate you at this point. Now, it even goes beyond this, because if you look at the behaviour of not simply people coming from the Islamic republics, or even the third world shitholes of Africa or something like that, again, they're a very tribal system. And in their own way, whether it's whatever religion it may or may not be, in their own way, they're quite pious and devout, because authority comes from the village, the family, the tribe. It doesn't come from independent institutions like police and courts, something that they just cannot get their heads around ever. Now, even the children of these migrants or illegals or aliens, whatever you want to call them, even the children, they still have very much the views of the tribe, because they hang around in ghettos. They go to the same, Islamic centres and mosques, and so all these prejudices against Christians are strongly reinforced. Now, if there was a place that talked about prejudices against, the Islamic Republic people or anything like that, that the authorities would clamp down on it and the white people would be thrown in prison in seconds flat. But again, the authorities don't attempt to stop this spread of hatred of white people and hatred of Christianity, or those that adhere to Christianity, or those simply that are not part of the Islamic piety. And this would seem to be that it was willful and determined and premeditated, as a way of creating a conflict and a division that otherwise wouldn't and doesn't need to exist and shouldn't exist. But I just wanted to give it some wider thing. The idea that there's just some bad guy going out and doing bad things, some rando, Islamic brown guy doing bad stuff to some rando white woman or girl. It's not that. It goes much further than that. And I believe the people that are bringing these mass migrants in, they know this, and they're not making any effort to ameliorate the situation. You've been with Tassel's today. Your pushback, John. Thank you for listening.